Welcome back, everybody. Today we're doing a deep dive into real estate trends. Specifically, from the first week of November 2024, we got some internal data from REMAX Escarpment in Niagara, and it's showing some pretty interesting things. We've got a surprising surge in appointments, some shifts in what price points are popular in different regions, and this intriguing appointment sold index. Ready to unpack all of
Uh,
this.
let's get into it. It's intriguing to see this level of activity, especially as we typically see things slow down a bit as we head into the holidays.
Right. The data shows a 33.8% increase in appointments for the first 9 days of November compared to the same time last year. And it's not just a year-over-year jump. We're also seeing a 4.1% increase week over week. That's almost 3,000 appointments just last week. It really makes you wonder what's driving this surge. Is it a sign of a strengthening economy? Are people feeling more confident about their job security? Or could it be something else entirely?
It's a great question, and it's one we need to look at carefully. While economic factors certainly play a role, remember that the real estate market is influenced by a complex interplay of things. We have interest rates, yes, but also demographic shifts, lifestyle preferences, even things like migration patterns and the availability of credit. A surge in appointments doesn't automatically point to a booming market. It could simply be pent-up demand being released after a period of uncertainty. It's like a puzzle, and we need to consider all the pieces.
That's a really good point. So, how do we start to make sense of these pieces? We keep hearing about this appointment sold index. What exactly is it and what does it tell us?
The appointment sold index is a unique metric that REMAX uses to track the ratio of appointments to properties actually sold. It helps to gauge the temperature of the market and understand buyer motivation.
So, if the index is high, does that mean buyers are hesitant or are they just being more selective?
A higher index could indicate a few things. It might suggest that buyers are taking their time, exploring their options and not feeling pressured to make a quick decision. It could also point to a market where there are more options available, giving buyers the luxury of being choosy. On the other hand, a lower index might suggest a more competitive market, where buyers are motivated and ready to act fast. It's not about good or bad, but rather about understanding the dynamics at play.
Okay, that makes sense. So, what does the index look like right now?
Looking at the past 4 weeks, we see some fluctuations. It started at 8.3, then jumped up to 11.5, followed by 8.8, and now it's holding steady at 8.9 for the past 2 weeks. This suggests a bit of a cooling off compared to that mid-October peak, but still indicates a decent level of buyer activity.
Interesting. And how does this index typically behave at this time of year? Does it tend to go up or down as we approach the holidays?
That's where things get even more interesting. Historically, we see a dip in activity towards the end of the year, but as we've already observed, this year seems to be bucking the trend.
Right. And to add to that, another piece of this puzzle that really stands out is the fact that sales have overtaken new listings by a significant margin, 15.5% to be exact. Last week, that difference was only 3.1%. That seems like a pretty substantial shift. Could we be seeing a move towards a seller's market?
It's certainly a possibility, and it's definitely something to keep an eye on. A continued imbalance between sales and new listings could create a more competitive environment for buyers, potentially leading to multiple offers and rising prices. But it's important to remember that we're only looking at a small snapshot of time. We need more data to confirm if this is a short-term blip or a sign of a sustained trend.
So what does this mean for someone who might be thinking about buying or selling a home right now?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't
I'd
it?
say so.
Well, I think this data reinforces the importance of having a solid understanding of the market dynamics. It's not enough to rely on general trends or national headlines. You need local expertise, someone who can help you interpret these figures and guide you through the nuances. Would you agree?
Absolutely. It's all about context, right? The national picture can only tell you so much. What's happening in Hamilton might be completely different from what's happening in Halton or Niagara.
Exactly. And that brings us to another interesting aspect of this data, the variations in price point preferences across these different regions.
Right. The data breaks down the top 5 price ranges in Hamilton, Halton, and Niagara. And there are some fascinating differences emerging. For example, the $1–2 million range is a top contender in both Hamilton and Halton. But it's less popular in Niagara. What do you make of that?
It's fascinating to see how these regional nuances play out. While the $1–2 million range is thriving in Hamilton and Halton, it's interesting that it falls to the 5th most popular price range in Niagara. This could indicate a few things. Maybe Niagara is attracting a different demographic, perhaps younger buyers or those seeking a more affordable lifestyle.
It makes you think about those broader social and economic factors we were discussing earlier.
Precisely. It could also be that the types of properties available in that price range differ between these regions. Maybe Niagara has a higher concentration of smaller homes or condos within that bracket, while Hamilton and Halton offer more detached homes or larger properties.
That's a great point. And speaking of Hamilton and Halton, it seems like the higher price ranges, especially those above $2 million, are consistently popular in those areas. What's driving that trend, do you think?
Well, both Hamilton and Halton have seen significant appreciation in recent years, particularly in those higher-end neighborhoods. This could be attracting more affluent buyers who are drawn to the amenities, schools, and lifestyle these areas offer.
It's interesting to see how different areas can have such distinct price point profiles. I was also struck by the fact that the $950,000 to $1 million range, which was present in Halton last week, completely vanished from the top 5 this week. What could explain such a sudden shift?
That's a curious one, isn't it? It could be a statistical anomaly. A few large sales in that price range the previous week skewing the data. Or it could be a sign of a very localized shift in demand. Perhaps a specific neighborhood within that price point suddenly became less desirable. Or maybe there's a new development that's attracting buyers at a slightly higher price point. It's definitely something to keep an eye on in the coming weeks.
Absolutely. And while those fluctuations are definitely intriguing, I'm also noticing that Hamilton seems to be holding relatively steady week to week. With only minor shuffles within those middle price ranges, it seems like a bit of an outlier compared to the more dynamic shifts we're seeing in Halton and Niagara.
That's a good observation. Hamilton's market might be a bit more balanced right now, with a steadier pace of sales and new listings. It could also reflect the fact that Hamilton's price points are generally lower than Halton's, making it a more accessible option for a wider range of buyers.
So as we wrap up our analysis of this week's data, what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
I think the main takeaway is that the real estate market is a complex ecosystem. There's no one-size-fits-all answer. What's happening at the national level doesn't always reflect the reality on the ground. Local expertise is crucial.
Right. It's all about understanding those regional nuances and the factors that drive them. And of course, staying informed about the latest trends and data points, which is exactly what we try to do here on the Deep Dive.
Exactly. I think another important takeaway is that the market is dynamic. It's constantly evolving. Don't be afraid to ask questions, challenge assumptions, and dig deeper.
And don't be afraid to adjust your strategy as needed. It's like navigating a ship through uncharted waters. You have to be prepared for the unexpected and be willing to change course if necessary.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So what are your thoughts on what we might see in the coming weeks? Do you think this surge in appointments will continue? Will sales continue to outpace new listings?
It's hard to say for sure. There are a lot of factors at play. But if I were to venture a guess, I'd say we're likely to see some continued volatility in the short term. The market is still adjusting to the recent interest rate hikes, and we're heading into a traditionally slower period. But there's also a lot of pent-up demand out there. And if economic conditions remain relatively stable, we could see a rebound in activity in the new year.
That makes sense. So what are some things our listeners should be paying attention to as they navigate the market in the coming weeks and months?
I'd say keep a close eye on inventory levels. Are new listings keeping pace with sales? Or are we seeing a continued tightening of supply? That will give you a good sense of how competitive the market might become.
Great advice. Any other pointers for our savvy listeners?
Definitely pay attention to interest rate movements. Even small changes can impact affordability and buying power.
Right, even 0.25% can make a difference when you're talking about a large mortgage.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the power of local market knowledge. Talk to real estate professionals in your area, attend open houses, and get a feel for what's happening on the ground.
Great tips. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on those regional price point trends we discussed? Do you see any major shifts on the horizon?
I think we'll continue to see some divergence between regions. Markets like Halton, with their strong economic fundamentals and high demand, are likely to remain competitive, especially in those upper price brackets.
Interesting. So what about areas like Niagara, which seem to be attracting a different type of buyer? What do you think the future holds for those markets?
Niagara's relative affordability and lifestyle appeal could make it a popular choice for first-time buyers and those looking to escape the higher prices of the GTA.
It sounds like there are opportunities out there for buyers and sellers alike, but it's all about finding the right fit right.
Exactly.
It seems like we've uncovered a lot of intriguing trends and data points today, but I'm wondering what stands out to you as the most significant insight from all of this.
What's truly fascinating to me is the dynamism we're seeing in the market. It's not a monolithic entity. It's a collection of micro-markets, each responding to a unique set of influences.
And those influences go far beyond just interest rates and economic indicators, right? We've talked about demographic shifts, lifestyle preferences, even things like migration patterns and the availability of credit.
Precisely. It's a reminder that real estate is fundamentally about people, their aspirations, their choices, their needs. And those things are constantly in flux.
So it's not just about crunching numbers, it's about understanding the human stories behind those numbers.
Absolutely. And that's where having a skilled real estate professional by your side can make all the difference. Someone who understands the local market, who can connect the dots between the data and the human element.
Right, because at the end of the day, real estate is about finding the right place for people to live, to work, to build their lives. It's not just about transactions, it's about community.
Beautifully said. And that brings me to another intriguing point. We've talked a lot about data and trends, but I think it's important to acknowledge that the future is never entirely predictable. There are always unforeseen events, unexpected shifts in sentiment, or even black swan events that can completely disrupt the market.
That's a really important reminder. So how do we navigate this inherent uncertainty?
By being adaptable, by staying informed, by cultivating a mindset of continuous learning, and perhaps most importantly, by not being afraid to ask questions.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into these real estate trends, what's the one thing you want our listeners to walk away with today? What's the key insight that will help them navigate this complex and ever-changing market?
I'd say the most valuable takeaway is this. Don't just rely on surface-level narratives. Dig deeper. Question assumptions. Connect the dots between seemingly unrelated trends. And never underestimate the power of local expertise.
Fantastic advice. It's like we always say knowledge is most valuable when it's understood and applied. So take these insights, apply them to your own situation, and keep exploring. Because the real estate market, like life itself, is a journey of continuous discovery.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into real estate trends. Until next time, happy house hunting.